Hello, everyone. We're going to take a break today from going down those checklist items for, in this case, autism, and do a holiday episode. Halloween is one of my favorite holidays, and there are some creepy things that have happened to me in the past. And I don't know if they have anything to do with being neurodivergent because, well, it's not like a psychologist or psychiatrist is going to put seeing ghosts inside of their, description. So I am going to talk today about my experiences with ghosts from the time I was very young. I promise you, all of this is real. I am not making up the stories. I'm Leah Batlle-Rafferty, and this is Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. Okay, so we're going to start with when I was possibly 3, maybe 4. I really can't remember because I was so young. We were in our house in El Salvador, and my mother had decided to paint a mural in my room. And because she was painting a mural, I couldn't stay in the bed in the room. So she put me in my brother's room. I want you to picture this. My brother's room was this very long-ish rectangular room instead of a square. The door was off-center. If you were facing the room from the little family room, the door was sort of to the right on the room wall. And I was put on the left. So my bed was moved into the room, and I was put against the left wall. So my headboard was against the wall where the door was. My footboard was against my brother's headboard. And his little footboard was against the closet. I think my mom said he was in a toddler bed. Based on his age, I must have been closer to 5. The room also, so if you were standing at the doorway and you looked straight across, you would see a window. And I don't know how many of you remember these, but in the South, down in sort of the beachy areas in Miami and of course in Latin countries, there were these like multi-pane, small pane windows where you would like turn a crank and all the little panes would open up, or turn a crank and they would all close. So his window was sort of like that. It didn't actually open up and down. It just had the little panes. And there were a couple of curtains to the side, to either side of the window, and those curtains were tied open. So I go to bed, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night and opening my eyes. And the first thing I noticed was that the curtains were blowing. No longer held to the side, but kind of blowing as if there was a strong wind, though I don't remember feeling one. I was pretty young, so maybe there was one, but definitely don't remember feeling it. And suddenly the curtains closed, so it was more like the gust blew them in a way that the curtains kind of met in the middle. And when they opened up, there was a girl. The girl was wearing a black dress with these tiny little cracks of color in it. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. The colors were a little bright, but in general, the dress was very, very black. And she was very solid, so completely solid. There was no see-through to her. I don't remember what hair color she had. I know everyone would love it if it was black, but yeah, I don't remember her hair. I don't really remember her face. But what I do remember is that she was holding a sickle. For those of you who don't know, the Grim Reaper holds a scythe, which is a long-handled curved blade. A sickle is a short-handled curved blade that's a little bit more curved. Anyways, so she's standing there and she starts to walk, and I'm 5 and she's walking towards the door. And so I do this thing as I realize that maybe she would see me and oh my God, what would happen if she has this weapon in her hand and she sees me? So I close my eyes and I close them really tightly and I try to breathe like I'm sleeping. Of course, this is a common tactic for those of us who are scaredy cats, and we all know that it doesn't really work, but still, I'm 5. I'm closing my eyes. I'm pretending to sleep. And the moment gets to be way too long, and I'm too scared. And eventually, I'm so worried that she's like standing over my bed, getting ready to like chop my head off or something, that I open my eyes. And she is at the foot of my bed, facing away from me. So the nearest thing that I can think of is she walked down the length of the kind of little hallway created by our beds and the wall, from the window to the door. And then she turned around and started walking back. So her back's to me, and she starts walking down the length of the little hallway towards the window, and she steps through it and disappears. This is one of the most vivid of the ghost stories that I have. The second one, which also happened when I was very, very young, was I was in my grandparents' house in a town. Well, it's not really a town. It used to be the capital city of El Salvador, but it's now kind of more of a smaller city called Santa Ana. And it's one of those houses that have a big square courtyard in the middle. Only like a U-shaped area of that courtyard was actually air conditioned. The other side was completely open to the elements. And one side, so when you first walked in, there was like a little parlor area, and there was a bedroom to the left. That was like one of my aunt's bedrooms. And then on the left-hand side, there was this very long sort of room that faced the courtyard. And they had this divider in it because it was basically two rooms, right? So I would, when I was little, be put in one of the beds in that room. And even then, I was a very avid reader. So I don't know how young I was when I started reading, but this night I fell asleep with a book. Now, this was very odd because I usually didn't fall asleep while reading. I cannot put a book down, and I can't fall asleep while reading. I have to like close it, put it away. But yeah, somehow this night I woke up and I was under the bed, and there was a book laying next to me. So I decided that I had probably fallen asleep and my book had fallen, and maybe I was groggy, and I decided to like crawl under the bed to get it. Fine. So I get up and I go to lay down in this bed, and I look around and I see these devil-like figures around my bed. And you're going to get why I'm laughing in a moment, because it wasn't really that scary. I mean, it was scary for a 3-year-old because they weren't really like animated. It was like if somebody had taken a paper doll sort of situation, but instead of dolls, created traditional, very stereotypical devils out of it, right? And the devils were all kind of daisy chained together, and they were holding hands, and they weren't moving, but they were floating around the bed. So kind of like old time weird movie reel things that have the little light strips in them, and they're like these circles, and you spin them and you can see things moving, but inside they're just sort of static images. So as you turn the thing, they move around with it, or maybe it's even more like a mobile, right? Like they just kind of floated around. They were all two-dimensional. So some of them were fully formed. Some of them were like legs or full like top of the body but no legs type of thing. So almost like somebody had cut it incorrectly. And of course I start screaming because this time I am very young. I'm pretty sure it was only me at this point, because I start screaming and my mom and dad rush in to check on me, and the devils sort of part for them. Of course, my mom and dad didn't see them, right? But they rush in, they grab me, they take me to their room to comfort me because I'm definitely having a problem at this point. And they took me into their bed, and I finally managed to fall asleep, but not well. And every time I opened my eyes that night, I saw these staticky isn't the word, static as in unmoving, colored devils peeking at me from everywhere, from the doorway to the bathroom, from the hallway, from any door that was open, so the closet, etc. So that was definitely not a good night's sleep. My mom claims that she was always a scaredy cat, and I made it so much worse on her. I remember being little, we were near a cemetery. I remember that every night I would see these shadows across the room, and my mom would kind of come in and explain that they were just the bushes outside, but they were my constant companions, right? Like one was a lumberjack who seemed to always be chopping down the wood. Of course, he never got anything clearly, but that was the one that I remember the most, but I think there were 2 or 3 of them. And then there was another instance where I remember waking up screaming, and my mother came into the room and she touched my leg. She didn't say a lot. She just seemed very, very comforting. And then the door opened and the lights came on, and my mom came into the room. That was my very, very early childhood. Clearly, I am still scared of the dark. I told myself for a long time that it must be imagination. I mean, it has to be, right? Like, this doesn't happen, right? So when we moved to Miami and finally moved to the house that became my parents' final home, I remember that I would always feel something walking down the road. Feeling very odd. I stopped seeing things at some point, but I felt things, and I would feel things coming down the road, and I would pretend that there was like a see-through bubble around my sister and I as this thing walked carefully, slowly down the road towards our house. And it wouldn't happen every night, but it was enough that I knew when it started to happen. And I would freak under the covers, and I would like cover my sister and I in these invisible bubbles. And I mean, that was my constant companion for a long time. When I moved to college, I remember being so excited because I was sleeping alone in a room and there were no scary things, nothing down the road, nothing anywhere. And about a year, maybe 1.5 years into college, suddenly I felt it. And there it was, somewhere outside was something that was coming towards me. And again, it happened in grad school. In grad school, I went to grad school for a year. I was fine for the year. In fact, I started working at a casino and coming home at like 2 a.m. No fear at all. I was doing great. And that summer, I think the second summer, so after I finished my first year of grad school, I was coming home from the casino at 2 a.m. I'd been doing this for, 2 months at this point. And suddenly I felt it. There it was, under a shadow, under a tree. And I tried not to run. I didn't want it to know that I knew it was there. You know, same thing as closing your eyes really tightly and hoping that something doesn't notice. And ran up, got into my bed, put the covers over my head, and hoped to heck that it would go away. I spent a lot of time trying to prove myself that this was my imagination. I figured I was just a scaredy cat. I figure I'm just, too susceptible to something. Maybe it's GI issues, right? So I would do things. One year, a friend of mine's husband rented out a sanatorium that does like ghost hunts for her 30th birthday. So it was like an overnight thing. And my husband was not going to be there because he had to go on a business trip or something. But I went because I figured I would prove to myself that this was all just me, right? The whole place was dark. There was no electricity. So clearly, I would just be scared everywhere. I'm a scaredy cat. It's the dark. We spent part of the night being given a tour. So we walked around and I was surprised. We stopped at The room that supposedly had the elderly lady that had all the creepy dolls, and it was clearly staged with all those like horrible, scary porcelain dolls that I can't stand. But I wasn't scared. And then we went to the room where there was supposedly a little boy that played with toys and rolled the ball. I wasn't scared there either. And we stopped at this one like place that supposedly every once in a while you would hear noises and things like that, and I wasn't scared. It was very odd. I expected to be terrified. I was not scared. And then one part of the tour took us through the dining room, and the dining room had these checkered floors, you know, those black and white ones that you see in the movies that you don't totally think are necessarily real, but yeah, they are. Yeah, this place had one of those. And the moment I stepped foot on one of those tiles, I was shaking from head to toe. Full body shaking, not just shivering, but it was vibrations from my foot all the way to my head. And we started to walk through it. And I asked the guide, I said, what happened here? And he's like, well, nothing really. Like he looks at a piano, and you could tell he had just gotten this idea just to like give me something to work off of. So he's like, yeah, maybe sometimes people hear the piano, right? Sometimes they hear the music from the piano, but that's about it. And he leads us out of there. And the moment my foot stepped off that tile, I stopped shaking. We started to do these EVPs, which are electronic voice phenomenon for any of you who have never done them. And it's where you basically ask questions to midair, and you have your phone or something recording the answers, and you're trying to get responses from ghosts. And we did some of that, and we wandered around, and at some point it came out that a couple that was there had been fooling around. They'd been scaring people. They'd been creating noises. They kind of were ruining the experience for the person whose birthday it was. So we were all pulled to the first floor, gathered together to have a discussion with said couple. And the husband of my friend, who is my friend at this point, but anyways, he and I were sitting in the back, kind of just watching. I don't think either of us really wanted to get involved in the kind of stressful, weird situation that was going on. And we both hear a whisper from behind us. We both turn to each other at the same time. This was a very odd situation. We look at each other. Everyone is on this floor. Everyone who came is standing in front of us. There is absolutely no way that any one of them had caused this particular noise. So we look at each other again. We look back at the door, and he's like, you want to go? And I was like, I guess so. That's why we're here, right? So we open this door that I don't think anyone had been through. And there is just a staircase. It must be like a little maintenance store or something. There's just one staircase. It goes up one level. There's concrete at the bottom. And we're like, okay. So we go up the stairs. We open the door. And it's the dining room. So my efforts to prove that it was just my imagination totally didn't work out for me. There was another time where my ex-husband and I had to move very quickly out of a particular apartment. And somebody had left their roommate stranded in a duplex. And so we decided to help them out by going and staying with them. We had to first clean up because the place had been left a complete mess and there was no way we were going to sleep in that room. So I was vacuuming and I remember seeing movement in a glass. And I would stop and I would angle myself differently so there was no way that I could see myself in the glass. And I would start vacuuming again and I would see movement in the glass. It happened about 6 times before I became so freaked that I had to stop. I wasn't sure about moving in there, but we really didn't have many choices. So we moved in, and the entire time we were in there, I swear, the hallway in the kind of second floor just felt very creepy, kind of dark. I don't remember exactly what gave me the impression that there was like a girl or something up there, but that was my impression. And, once again, hey, my imagination is really, really crazy. Like, I must be making things up. So the guy we were sharing the duplex with probably drank a little too much, but he was okay. So we were hanging out and he's drinking and he's telling me, I don't know if it's Halloween or something. I don't know how we got on this topic, but we're having a discussion about how he doesn't believe in things like ghosts and things like that. And so I looked at him and I said, so you haven't seen the little girl on the second floor? And he stopped dead. Dead. He just stared at me for a moment. And he leans forward and he whispers, "You've seen her too?" I about jumped out of my chair. Just ready to go running off. So, for those of you who are listening to this, I have not yet been able to prove to myself that the things that happen to me are my imagination. And I've tried. I have tried so hard. Final story for you. When we moved to our current house, I remember that at night, the shower would turn on in our bathroom. And my husband can attest to this, and he does not believe in ghosts, I don't think. The shower would turn on by itself, run for a little while and turn off. And he would say, "Oh, it's the hot water valve. There must be something with the hot water valve." And I was like, but why would it shut off? And why would it turn on only at night if it's the hot water valve? And we had people look. Nothing was wrong. The water would just turn on by itself in the middle of the night and turn off, to the point where I closed the bathroom every night. And that lasted, I want to say, for the first year and a half, 2 years we were here. And then it stopped. It's never happened again. I don't know what caused it to stop. I don't know why it started. But just so you know, I still haven't been able to prove it's my imagination. I hope you enjoyed this holiday version of Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. Thank you for tuning in to Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. This podcast was written, edited, and produced by me, Leah Batlle-Rafferty. All music is by Carlos Neda, and this podcast is part of Labrat Solutions, Inc.